plane was almost full when Emily slid into the empty first-class seat, trying to look confident even though her hands were shaking. She'd had the worst morning of her life, and right now she just needed one breath that didn't feel like drowning. So, when the flight attendant warned her the seat was reserved, Emily pretended she didn't hear. But she heard everything the moment he arrived. A tall black man in a perfectly cut suit stopped beside her, not angry, just studying her like he already knew every excuse she was about to make. Passengers watched. Emily's pulse hammered. She whispered, "Sorry. I didn't know." He didn't move, didn't smile. Then the attendant leaned toward Emily and whispered the sentence that turned her stomach cold. "Ma'am, you just took the CEO's seat." And from that second on, nothing in her life stayed the same. She felt the mistake settle into her bones the moment she sat down. First class was too quiet, too polished, too aware of her. Still, the seat was empty, and she was drowning in a morning that refused to give her a break. She told herself she'd move if someone showed up. She told herself she'd only sit for a minute, but she also knew she was lying to her own heartbeat. Then the whispers started, soft, scattered, sliding from row to row like the brush of cold fingertips. Emily straightened her spine, pretending she didn't hear them, pretending she belonged. But her hands betrayed her, tightening around the armrest until her knuckles went pale. When he appeared, the whole cabin shifted. Not loudly, not with gasps or stares, just a subtle stillness as if the air had been waiting for him. Tall, sharp suit, dark skin catching the overhead light, eyes that didn't search, eyes that chose what to see. He stopped beside her seat. No anger, no sigh, no forced smile. Just quiet focus, like he was studying a puzzle he hadn't expected to find here. Emily could barely look at him. I didn't know this was taken," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air vents. He didn't answer. He didn't even gesture toward the seat she was in. Instead, he handed his coat to the attendant and lowered himself into the spot beside her. And somehow, that silence felt heavier than if he'd yelled. People around them kept glancing over, waiting for something. Retribution, embarrassment, a display of power. Emily felt every one of those eyes like heat on her skin. She wanted to apologize again, but the words knotted inside her throat. She pulled her bag closer, shrinking into the leather seat that suddenly felt too big, too soft, too wrong. The plane doors shut. The engines rumbled. The moment stretched painfully. Finally, he turned his head slightly, just enough that she knew he was looking at her. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "You're tense." She blinked, startled. Of all the things he could have said, that was the one she least expected. "I'm fine," she tried, though her pulse hammered in her ears. He watched her for another beat, measuring the softness of her lie. "Are you?" he asked. Not accusing, just curious, almost gentle. Emily swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight like the truth was lodged there, pressing upward. She wanted to say the polished version of her life, the one she rehearsed for strangers, but exhaustion slipped through the cracks. "I'm just trying to get to an interview," she murmured. "I'm already late, and I can't afford to mess it up." A small, unreadable shift crossed his expression. Not sympathy, not pity, something quieter. The plane rolled forward. A vibration traveled through the cabin, rattling her water cup. With every bump, Emily's breath grew shallower. She hated how transparent she felt, how easily this man, this stranger, could see her unraveling. Her voice dropped again. "I wasn't trying to take someone's seat. I just needed a moment to breathe." "Everyone needs those," he said. The words were simple, but the tone carried weight, like they came from a place she didn't understand yet. She chanced a glance at him. No arrogance, no irritation, just patience and an unsettling calm, like nothing could shake him. That made her more self-conscious, not less. Most men she met filled silence with noise. He let silence become a conversation. As they lifted off the runway, Emily noticed another pair of eyes watching them. A middle-aged woman leaned toward her husband, whispering behind her hand while glancing at Darius with recognition. The husband nodded subtly, confirming something Emily wasn't privy to. The attention prickled along her spine. Something was off. People weren't whispering about her anymore. They were whispering about him, and he acted as though he'd learned long ago not to pay attention. Emily tried to look away, but curiosity tugged hard. "Do people know you?" she asked quietly. He gave the faintest smile. "Sometimes." That was it. No name, no explanation. Nothing to help her understand why the cabin seemed to orbit him. She let the topic drop, but her mind kept spinning. Maybe he was a politician, or an actor, or someone whose photo she should have recognized but didn't because she'd spent the morning running on fumes and panic. The engines softened. The flight attendant passed, giving him a respectful nod. Too respectful, too formal for a normal passenger. Emily pretended not to see it. Her nerves buzzed again. She hated how awkward she felt, how out of place. "I'm sorry," she said again, softer this time. "About the seat." This time he answered without looking at her. "I'm not angry." "But it was yours." "Yes," he said simply. "But you're here now." She didn't know what to do with that. His calm was disarming, unsettling, almost kind? No, not quite. It was restraint, as if he was used to choosing when to react and when to stay still. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence. Her stomach lurched. Her fingers grabbed the shared armrest before she could stop them. Heat flushed her face. She released it instantly. He noticed. Of course he did. "Do you fly often?" he asked. "Not enough to get used to it," she said, forcing a shaky laugh. "Not enough to afford this section either." He glanced at her, and for the first time something warm flickered behind his eyes. Not amusement, understanding. "What's in the city?" he asked. "A chance," she said. "One I can't lose." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. And then he fell quiet again, as if her honesty shifted something in him he didn't want to show. The engine pitch changed. The plane slowed slightly, dipping, not dangerously but enough that passengers stirred. Emily looked toward the window, catching the faintest hesitation in the pilot's tone as he announced a delay ahead on the runway, requesting the crew to hold position. They weren't moving forward anymore. She exhaled shakily, her imagination spiraling. Late. Later. Too late. Beside her, the man adjusted his cuffs, unbothered by the interruption. His voice came low, steady. "Looks like we'll be here a while." Emily felt her heart drop. Of all the mornings, of all the flights, of all the seats she could have taken, she had ended up trapped beside a man who felt like a storm held behind calm eyes. And now, because of one stolen seat and one inevitable delay, she was stuck with him long enough for everything in her life to tilt again, whether she was ready for it or not. The captain's voice cracked through the speakers before the plane even reached the runway, and the shift in his tone made Emily's heartbeat trip. He didn't sound confident. He sounded delayed, the worst word in her vocabulary. The cabin fell into a disappointed murmur as he explained a mechanical issue that needed inspection. 45 minutes. Maybe an hour. Her stomach dropped so sharply she gripped her knees to steady herself. Every minute felt like a door closing, one after another, and she imagined her interviewers watching the clock, crossing her name off before she even arrived. Beside her, Darius didn't react like the rest of the cabin. No sigh, no irritated huff. He simply watched her, noticing the subtle panic she tried to hide behind a tight jaw and a forced swallow. She felt his gaze before she met it. He held out a small bottle of water, barely lifting his hand. "You should drink," he said quietly. "You look pale." She hesitated, then took it. Her fingers brushed his for a second. Nothing dramatic, but enough for her to pull back a little too fast. "I'm fine," she murmured. "You said that earlier," he replied. Not confrontational, just observant. It made her shoulders stiffen. Passengers shifted restlessly. A child cried somewhere behind them. The air felt warmer, heavier, like being trapped inside a ticking clock. Emily tried to breathe slowly, but the seconds stretched like elastic bands threatening to snap. She stared out the window until her reflection blurred. I really needed to be in that city by noon. Darius leaned back, folding his hands calmly. What happens at noon? A job interview. She didn't know why she answered. Maybe it slipped out. Maybe the weight of it was too heavy to keep inside. It's important. Important how? He asked. She shook her head, wanting to hide inside her hair. Just is. He didn't push harder, not with his voice. But silence from someone like him carried its own pressure. After a moment, she exhaled. It's the only place that called me back. The only chance I've had in months. His eyes softened almost imperceptibly. So, you're running towards something. And away from something, she said before she could stop herself. He nodded once, like he understood that far too well. A clang echoed through the cabin as the maintenance crew entered. The aisle grew narrow with reflective vests and tool belts. One mechanic passed their row and, to Emily's surprise, slowed. His expression shifted when he saw Darius. Not fear, respect. The kind of respect that came with years of watching someone build something bigger than themselves. "Morning, sir," the mechanic murmured. Darius gave a single, acknowledging nod. No introduction. No explanation. The man continued down the aisle, but Emily felt the energy change inside her. So he wasn't just a CEO floating above the company. He was someone the ground crew recognized instantly. Someone they saluted. That kind of presence didn't develop by accident. Emily tried to act like she hadn't noticed, but she had, and the knowledge pressed against her chest, making her even more aware of how recklessly she'd taken his seat. Darius finally spoke again, voice soft enough that only she could hear. "You don't have to pretend you're not worried." "I'm not pretending," she said, though they both knew it wasn't true. He angled his head slightly. "You're gripping the seat like you're bracing for impact." She looked down. Her fingers were indeed wrapped tighter than she realized. She forced them open. "I just hate feeling helpless." "That makes two of us," he murmured. Something about the way he said it, quiet, honest, pulled her eyes to him. For a moment she saw past the controlled exterior. There was history in his voice. Storms he didn't name. Loss he didn't parade. She turned back to the window, letting the hum of the engines fill the silence. After a long moment, she spoke. "My mom passed last year. Everything fell apart after that. I'm just trying to rebuild." He didn't offer cliches or sympathy. He just listened. Really listened. She felt the weight of his attention like a warm hand on her shoulder. "And the job?" he asked. "It's entry level," she said, softly. "But it would mean a place to start, a place to breathe." He nodded, a slow, thoughtful motion. "Everyone starts somewhere. Even CEOs." The word hung between them, unspoken but understood. So he knew she knew, and he didn't mind. Her breath loosened a little. "You built your company, didn't you?" Darius lifted an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. "You did some quick research." "Not quick enough," she muttered. "Apparently." He let out a quiet, amused exhale. "It's not a secret, but I prefer people meet me first, not the title." Emily glanced at him. "Must be nice when you have the choice." His expression shifted. Just a flicker, like she'd hit something he didn't expect. "It isn't always a choice," he said. "Not when the world decides who you are before you open your mouth." She felt the depth beneath his words, but didn't know how to touch it without intruding. So she let the moment sit between them, warm and heavy. The maintenance crew walked back up the aisle, signaling the inspection was almost done. Passengers straightened. Emily's pulse quickened with hope. Maybe they'd still take off in time. Maybe she wasn't completely doomed. Darius studied her reaction. "If we're in the air within 20 minutes, you might still make it." She shot him a skeptical look. "Are you guessing?" "I know this airline," he said simply. The way he said no made her think he knew more than she realized. Flight patterns, delays, schedules, maybe even the exact margin of error her morning depended on. The engines spooled louder. The captain's voice returned, announcing they'd attempt takeoff shortly. Relief washed through the cabin in a warm wave. Emily exhaled. Thank God. But Darius didn't share her relief. His eyes had drifted toward the aisle again, catching on a man clutching his chest 2 rows ahead. A woman beside him pressed the call button urgently. Voices rose in alarm. Emily didn't notice until the flight attendant rushed forward, kneeling beside the passenger. Panic spread in quick, sharp whispers. Darius stood instantly, as if instinct had pulled him up before thought could catch up. Emily followed his gaze, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the man's body slump sideways. The relief she felt seconds ago evaporated. The real disruption had arrived, one that would pull their lives into a collision far deeper than a stolen seat or delayed flight. And as the attendants shouted for help, Emily realized the day was no longer about making an interview. It was about surviving whatever happened next. The moment the man's body slumped forward, the cabin snapped into a different kind of silence, one filled with fear instead of impatience. A flight attendant shouted for a doctor, and passengers lurched sideways to see what was happening. Emily couldn't move. Her breath stopped in her chest, tight and sharp, the way it had the night her mother collapsed in their kitchen. Same helpless faces. Same urgent voices. Same feeling of watching life slip faster than she could reach it. Her throat closed. Her vision tunneled. She didn't even realize she was shaking until a hand touched her arm. Firm, steady, warm enough to cut through the cold rising inside her. "Emily," Darius said, just her name. Quiet, but anchored, like something she could hold on to. "Look at me." She tried. Her eyes slipped away from the chaos, toward him. He was kneeling slightly in the aisle, lowering himself until he was level with her, blocking her view of the man struggling to breathe. His presence didn't erase the panic. It simply gave it somewhere softer to fall. "Breathe with me," he murmured. "In, now, out. Slow." His voice pulled air back into her lungs, shaky but real. She followed his rhythm, her fingers clutching the edge of her seat until pressure replaced paralysis. The plane dipped slightly as the pilot announced an emergency descent, and the cabin filled with scattered prayers and unsteady gasps. Emily stared at Darius, feeling the world tilt around him. He didn't seem rattled. Concerned, yes. Focused, absolutely, but not shaken. It was as if he'd learned long ago how to survive panic without letting it claim him. As the plane dropped lower, turbulence rattled overhead bins. Emily's breath stuttered again. "I can't." "You can," he said. "You already are." Another breath. Another small inch of control returning. The wheels hit the runway harder than usual, bouncing once before gripping the asphalt. The plane screeched, slowed, then shuddered to a stop. Applause broke out, the desperate kind people use to hide fear. Paramedics rushed in moments later, carrying equipment, voices overlapping. Emily felt herself folding inward until Darius stood, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said gently. "Come on." The aisle became a river of frantic passengers. People jostled for their bags, their connections, their explanations. Emily would have been swallowed by the push if Darius hadn't stepped between her and the crowd. He positioned himself like a shield, not physically imposing, just intentionally present, redirecting others with a calm authority that made them move without question. She followed him down the jet bridge, her legs still trembling. The small regional terminal buzzed like a kicked hive, phones ringing, children crying, flight attendants explaining they didn't know when the next plane would depart. Emily wrapped her arms around herself. The fluorescent lights felt too bright, the voices too sharp. She backed against a wall just to feel something solid. Darius watched her quietly. "You okay?" She laughed weakly. "Not even close." For the first time, something like empathy softened his expression. Not pity. Something deeper, recognizing a bruise he'd worn once himself. Passengers clustered around a gate agent demanding answers. Emily stepped aside, giving them room. Darius stood near her, hands in his pockets, surveying the chaos with the poised stillness of someone used to walking into problems rather than avoiding them. She pulled out her phone, needing distraction, needing distance from her own mind. She typed his name almost without thinking. Darius Cole. Articles filled the screen, interviews, old photos, a biography headline that made her eyebrows lift. From foster care to CEO, the rise of Skylink's youngest leader. She scrolled slowly, absorbing each sentence. He'd moved through childhood homes like revolving doors, earned scholarships he was never expected to get, built a startup airline when everyone said the industry was impossible to break into. She felt a strange ache reading it, an understanding that he had climbed alone, step by brutal step. She didn't notice him lean closer until his shadow stretched across her screen. "Researching me?" he asked softly. She nearly dropped her phone. Just curiosity." He didn't tease, didn't smirk, just exhaled with a small, almost shy smile. "I don't mind." She blinked, surprised. "Most people with your kind of story would." "Most people don't know my story," he said. "They know the headlines. That's different." She hesitated. "The headlines are impressive." He shrugged one shoulder, gaze drifting to the crowd. "They don't mention the nights I slept in a shelter, or the people who told me someone like me wouldn't fit in a boardroom. Headlines only like the shiny parts." "Still," she said gently, "you built something." He glanced at her, really looked. "You're building something, too." She swallowed. "Feels like it's falling apart." "It's not," he said. "You're just in the storm." The way he said it, quiet, steady, made her chest loosen, as if he wasn't comforting her, but speaking from memory. A family with children rushed past them, frantic to find food. A businessman argued with the agent about expenses. The world felt messy and unpredictable, but Darius remained centered, a point of gravity in the chaos. Another silence settled, not awkward this time, just full. Comfortable. Emily leaned back against the wall. "How did you do it?" she asked. "How did you go from everything you were facing to this?" He took a moment before answering. "I got tired of being powerless, so I decided I wouldn't stay that way." "And no one stopped you?" "Oh, plenty tried." A soft laugh escaped him. "But once you've lived through things meant to break you, critics lose their power." His honesty warmed the cold corners inside her. She hadn't met many people who spoke of pain without masking it or performing it. He just offered it, steady, unashamed. Emily looked down at her hands. "You noticed me earlier, when I panicked." "I've seen that look before," he said. "In the mirror, mostly." Her breath caught. Suddenly, the distance between them felt thinner, not in a romantic way, but in a human one. Two people who had scraped their way through different storms and found themselves standing on the same patch of quiet ground. "I'm sorry you had to see that," she said softly. "There's nothing to be sorry for." It was embarrassing. "No," he said, shaking his head. "It was real." Her eyes met his, and she felt something shift, something deeper than gratitude, lighter than connection. Recognition, maybe. A voice announced overhead that all passengers from their flight would be provided hotel accommodations until further notice. A mix of relief and frustration rippled across the room. Emily glanced at the crowd, already imagining the lines, the waiting, the exhaustion piling on top of exhaustion. Darius rolled his shoulders, preparing to move. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you checked in before the rush." "Me? Why me?" she asked, surprised. He didn't give a grand reason. He didn't offer some heroic explanation. He just gave her a look, steady, almost protective. "Because you look like you've had enough storms for one day?" And without waiting for approval, he stepped into the crowd, clearing a path she could walk through, right beside him. But Emily didn't know yet that Darius wasn't just guiding her toward the hotel counter. He was guiding her into the next turn of a story neither of them expected to be part of. Emily expected the hotel to feel like the final blow of the day, some cramped room with thin sheets and a window facing a brick wall. Something that matched the chaos she'd crawled through. So when the front desk clerk handed her a sleek keycard and said, "Penthouse level," she almost laughed. She thought it was a mistake, another twist she wasn't ready for. But when the elevator doors opened into a quiet hallway with soft lighting and polished floors, the laughter died in her throat. Her suite was enormous. Too enormous. City view. Living room. A bed big enough to swallow her whole. She stood in the doorway, waiting for alarms to go off, waiting for someone to tell her she'd used the wrong key. When no one came, suspicion settled in her chest like a weight. She marched back down to the lobby, adrenaline pushing her through the crowd of stranded passengers. The clerk looked up, startled as she approached the desk. "This is wrong," Emily said. "That room is not for me." The clerk smiled politely. "Miss Hart, your room was arranged personally." "By who?" she demanded. "Mr. Cole," the clerk said. "He covered rooms for all passengers. But yours, your suite, he requested specifically." Emily felt heat rush to her cheeks. Not the pleasant kind, but the kind that mixes anger with confusion. She didn't wait for more explanation. She spotted him across the lobby, leaning slightly as he spoke to a hotel manager. Calm, collected, unaware that he'd just set fire to her equilibrium. She stormed toward him before she could stop herself. "Why did you do that?" Darius turned, eyebrows lifting just a fraction. "Do what?" "That room, that suite." Her voice wavered between outrage and incredulous disbelief. Why keep helping me? I stole your seat. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." The manager excused himself, sensing tension. Darius let out a slow breath, studying her expression like he was choosing his words carefully. "Emily, it's just a room." "No," she shot back, "it's not. Not when it comes from you." He paused. Something softened behind his eyes, the kind of softness that doesn't come easily to people who've lived through things. Then he said quietly, "Because you remind me who I used to be." Her anger stalled. Confusion slipped into its place. What does that mean? He didn't elaborate. Not yet. He simply held her gaze with a depth that made the lobby noise fade around them. For a moment she stood still, her breath caught in the space between what she thought she knew about him and what she was starting to understand. Before she could ask more, a hotel staff member approached, informing guests that a complimentary dinner buffet had been arranged. People applauded half-heartedly, relief mixing with exhaustion. Emily stepped back, suddenly aware she was too close to him, too tangled in feelings she didn't have names for. Later, she found herself seated at a long dinner table with other stranded passengers. Warm lights, soft chatter, the clinking of plates. Someone cracked a joke about travel nightmares, and a wave of laughter rolled across the room. It felt surreal, this brief bubble of comfort after everything that had happened. Darius sat a few seats down, speaking with a reporter who had somehow made their way into the crowd. Emily caught snippets of the conversation, questions sharp like needles, crafted to provoke. "Some say your airline overworks staff," the reporter prodded. "And some say storms can be controlled," Darius replied, unruffled. doesn't make either true. The reporter pushed harder. What about people claiming you've lost touch? That you're too distant from real passengers? Emily watched the subtle shift in Darius's posture, the straightening of his spine, the quiet tightening around his eyes. Not defensiveness, resolve. I grew up being told I didn't belong in rooms like this, he said evenly. So I make sure others don't feel that way on my flights. That's not distance, that's design. The table fell silent for a moment. Even the reporter seemed thrown off balance. Emily felt something unexpected stir in her. Pride, admiration, and something warmer she refused to name. When dinner ended, people drifted toward elevators carrying tired children and half-finished conversations. Emily stepped outside instead, needing air. The night was cool, the sky washed with city lights, the pavement still damp from a recent drizzle. She wrapped her arms around herself, breathing in the quiet. Footsteps approached softly. She didn't have to turn to know it was him. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much noise inside my head," she admitted. He nodded, as if he understood that more than he wished he did. They stood side by side, not touching, not speaking, just sharing the space like two people who'd survived the same storm. Emily broke the silence first. "I'm scared," she whispered. "What if I fail tomorrow? What if I mess up the only chance I have?" He looked at her, really looked. "Fear doesn't mean you're unprepared. It means you care." She let out a shaky breath. "Easy for you to say." He gave a humorless smile. "You think I don't feel it? I'm afraid every day of becoming someone I wouldn't respect. Success changes people, Emily. Sometimes quietly, sometimes fast." She turned toward him. "Do you feel like you're changing?" He hesitated, a small vulnerable hesitation she hadn't seen from him before. "Sometimes I worry I already have." A breeze rustled the trees around them, carrying the faint scent of rain. It eased something between them, softened the edges of a conversation neither had planned to have. "You don't seem lost," she said. "I hide it well," he replied. For a moment the world shrank to just their breaths, their doubts, the quiet pull neither of them stepped into. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something raw, something that felt like standing on the edge of a moment that could go in 1,000 different directions. Emily shifted her weight, closing a small distance without realizing it. Darius noticed. His eyes flicked to hers, then away, as if he feared crossing an invisible line. "Get some rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow matters." His words lingered like a hand against her back, steadying her before she stepped toward the hotel doors. She paused once, turning back. He was still there, hands in his pockets, watching the city like it held answers he wasn't ready to say out loud. Emily swallowed the warmth rising in her chest. Morning would pull them in different directions. Her interview, his empire, their separate worlds. But tonight, just for tonight, they had shared something unspoken and unmistakably real. She walked inside, uncertain of where this connection would lead, only that it wasn't done with them yet. Emily woke before her alarm, heart punching the quiet hotel room like it was trying to get out. For a moment she lay still, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word she and Darius had shared the night before. His honesty, his steadiness, the way he'd looked at her like she wasn't foolish or fragile, just human. But she pushed all of that away. There wasn't room for it today. Today was hers. She had to prove that, if not to the world, then at least to herself. By the time she reached the interview building, her palms were damp and her pulse thudded in her ears. The glass doors reflected a version of her she barely recognized. Tired, determined, terrified. She exhaled and stepped inside before she could lose her nerve. The waiting room buzzed with quiet competition. Other candidates sat with crisp suits and calm smiles, flipping through notes with practiced confidence. Emily took an empty seat and clasped her hands tightly in her lap. She refused to think about first class, or emergency landings, or the man who had walked into her life like a storm wrapped in silence. She didn't want her courage tied to anyone else's presence. When they called her name, she stood on shaky legs, smoothing her jacket as she walked into a bright room with a long table and 3 interviewers. Their expressions were polite but unreadable, the kind that made you feel judged before the first question even landed. The technical questions came first, structured, predictable, almost comforting. She answered with clarity she didn't know she had, tapping into every late-night study session, every moment she'd spent convincing herself she wasn't done yet. The panel nodded, took notes, asked follow-ups. Some part of her dared to hope she was holding her ground. Then came the question that cracked her. "Tell us about a time you demonstrated resilience." Her breath stalled. Her throat tightened. Resilience. The word opened too many doors, each leading to a memory she wasn't ready to stand in front of. Losing her mother, losing her job, losing herself, piece by piece. She could feel her composure slipping, her voice thin, her thoughts blurring. One interviewer watched her a little too closely, like they were already waiting for the moment she faltered. She almost did. Until one sentence from last night echoed through her mind, as soft as the night breeze Darius said it in. "Fear doesn't mean you're unprepared. It means you care." Emily inhaled slowly, not the shallow, panicked kind. A real breath. "When my mom passed," she began, surprising even herself, "I thought my life would stop with hers. I wasn't prepared. I didn't know how to start over, but I learned something important. Resilience isn't about bouncing back. It's about choosing one step when everything feels impossible, and I've been doing that every day since." The room went still. One interviewer set their pen down and simply listened, really listened, in the way that told her she'd finally broken through whatever walls they had built between them. She continued, steadier now. "I don't have the straightest path, but I've kept walking. That's my resilience." When she finished, she felt drained, like she'd poured out a piece of herself she hadn't meant to reveal. But she also felt strong, real, not polished or perfect, just true. They thanked her, told her they'd be in touch, and just like that, it was over. Outside, the sun felt too bright. She stepped onto the sidewalk and let the city noise wash over her. Car horns, rushing footsteps, snippets of conversations. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt empty, suspended between hope and exhaustion. Then she saw him, leaning against a streetlight across the plaza, hands in his pockets, suit jacket open, watching her with that quiet, unreadable expression that somehow made her chest tighten every time. She walked toward him slowly. "What are you doing here?" "Waiting," he said simply. "For what?" "For you to finish." She narrowed her eyes. "Did you interfere?" "No." He shook his head once. "But I made sure no one else would." She blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said gently, "that people love to underestimate someone who walks in with fear instead of confidence, and I wasn't going to let bias decide your future." Her breath caught. "You didn't help me." "No," he agreed, "just protected the fairness you deserved." A strange, warm ache filled her chest, relief mixed with something tender, something she didn't know how to name. It wasn't gratitude exactly, and it wasn't affection. It was something deeper, something built on being seen in the moments she most wanted to disappear. "How did it go?" he asked. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'm proud of what I said." "Good." A faint smile touched his lips. "You should be." They stood there on the sidewalk, surrounded by strangers rushing past, but the world felt oddly quiet between them. Softer, like a thread had woven itself from the plane to the emergency landing to the hotel to here, and neither of them wanted to pull away from it. Emily tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You didn't have to come." "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." Her heartbeat kicked once, hard. She looked away before the warmth in her eyes gave too much away. He cleared his throat softly. "You should rest. The next few days might be big for you." "And you?" she asked. "Back to your empire?" "Maybe," he said, glancing up at the buildings around them. "Or maybe I'll let it run without me for a little while." There was something in his voice, something vulnerable, almost hopeful. She didn't dare touch it. They walked a few steps together before stopping at a crosswalk. The light changed. People surged forward. Emily hesitated, feeling the moment stretch thin between them. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For believing I could do this." His eyes softened. "You did that part yourself." The words settled in her like a promise, not from him, but from the version of herself she had fought to become. They parted at the corner. No dramatic goodbye, no lingering looks, just a quiet awareness that something had shifted between them, something neither of them could fully express yet. Weeks would pass. Life would resume its rhythm. But somewhere above the clouds, on a flight neither expected to share again, the universe was already stitching the next chapter together, 35,000 feet in the air. Emily didn't realize how much her life had changed until the email arrived. Short, simple, almost unreal. "We are pleased to offer you the position." She reread the sentence 4 times, waiting for it to disappear, waiting for the old rhythm of disappointment to rush in and take its place. But it stayed, solid, hers. She didn't cry, not exactly. Her breath just caught in that quiet, stunned way where joy takes its time settling in. A week later, she stood at the gate for her first business flight, badge clipped to her blazer, backpack slung over her shoulder. The same airline, the same logo, the same blue trim she used to associate with fear and turbulence and being wildly out of place. Now it felt different, like the color of a door she'd finally been allowed to open. Boarding began. Emily stepped onto the jet bridge, heart tapping a soft rhythm in her chest. She wasn't nervous, not really, just aware, present. It felt good. Then she stepped into first class and froze. There he was, Darius Cole, perfectly relaxed in seat 1A, posture loose, jacket folded neatly beside him. He looked up at her with a slow, familiar smile that softened the edges of everything inside her. "Well," he said, voice warm with amusement, "look who finally made it." Emily felt a laugh slip out before she could hide it. This is becoming a pattern. He gestured to the seat beside him. The same seat she had stolen, the same seat that had started everything. "Thought you'd want your seat back?" Her chest fluttered. Not the panicked kind. The kind that feels like recognition. She walked toward him, the memory of that first terrified moment flickering for a heartbeat before dissolving under the gentler reality of now. "You're sure?" she teased. "I hear this row is reserved for important people." "It is," he replied, lifting an eyebrow. "Sit down." She did, and instead of shrinking into the seat, she settled into it like it belonged to her, like she belonged here. The plane filled around them, soft conversations, the rustle of coats, the low hum of the ventilation system, and still it felt like they were the only 2 people suspended in that quiet moment before takeoff. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Known what?" "That I'd get the job." Darius tilted his head. "You think I'm that confident?" "I think you see things in people before they see them in themselves," she said. His smile faded into something gentler, deeper. "You earned it, Emily. I just never doubted you would." A warmth spread through her, slow and steady, like stepping into sunlight after too many months of winter. She didn't know how to answer, so she didn't. She just let the moment sit between them, breathing softly. The engines roared to life beneath their feet. Emily inhaled, waiting for the familiar pinch of fear she'd carried for years, But it didn't come. Instead, she felt calm, grounded by the presence beside her, not dependent on him, just steadied. Her own strength, quiet but real, filled the spaces fear used to occupy. Darius glanced at her hands resting on her lap. "No white-knuckle gripping this time," he said. "Not today." "What changed?" She looked out the window, watching the runway lights blur into thin, glowing lines. "Maybe I finally stopped running from everything. Maybe I just got tired of feeling small." "And now?" he asked softly. She met his gaze. "Now I don't." He nodded, almost proudly, as if her growth was something he'd been rooting for long before she realized it was happening. The plane lifted off, smooth and steady, rising through a layer of pale clouds. The light shifted, dimmer, softer, casting a warm glow across Darius's face. She could see the quiet in him, the way the sky loosened something in his shoulders. "Do you ever get tired of flying?" she asked. "Never," he said. "But I get tired of flying alone." The words weren't flirtation. They weren't dramatic or heavy. They just existed, honest and unpolished. Emily's heartbeat slowed, settling into a deeper rhythm. She didn't reach for his hand. He didn't reach for hers. They didn't need to. The connection was there anyway, subtle and steady, like two currents finally finding a path that didn't fight them. They talked. Soft, easy conversation about work, about childhood memories, about the strange way life rearranges things when you least expect it. He told her about the pressure of being at the top, the loneliness that came with always being the one others looked to. She told him about rebuilding her confidence, about the fear that had once lived in her like a second heartbeat. Somewhere over the clouds, the space between them softened. Their shoulders didn't touch, but they felt close. Closer than strangers. Closer than friends. Like two people who had walked through storms and finally found a pocket of calm air to breathe in. As the plane leveled out, Darius looked out the window, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know, I used to think life only moved upward if you forced it to, but sometimes it rises on its own, when you let the right people in." Emily smiled, tracing the outline of the horizon with her eyes. "Maybe some mistakes aren't mistakes." He turned to her. "Like stealing my seat?" "Exactly," she breathed. They didn't make promises. They didn't name what was happening between them. They just existed in a gravity all their own, suspended in a moment stitched from chance, choice, and something neither of them expected to find at 35,000 feet. The sky outside glowed with a soft golden light, wide open and full of possibility, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like it belonged to both of them.